My name is Terry Reynolds, 54 years old, and I never expected to face my 16-year-old son across my desk as he told me he wanted to abandon our family name. The words cut deep. I don't want your last name anymore. My new dad says you're a loser, and I should take a real man's name. My ex-wife, Sarah, stood beside him smiling with satisfaction. Instead of arguing, I simply nodded, took out a pen and said, "Fine. Sign here." Their confident expressions faltered as I slid the document forward. They had no idea what they were about to lose. While I tell you what happened when our family lawyer called them a week later, let me know where you're watching from and hit that subscribe button. If you believe family legacy is about more than just a name. I come from a lineage of hard-working Americans who built something meaningful from nothing. My parents were both dedicated teachers who emphasized education and integrity above material possessions. Though we lived comfortably in a modest suburban home, I was taught that true wealth came from character and contribution, not bank accounts. My grandfather, Walter, owned a small woodworking shop where I spent summers from age 12 learning to craft furniture. "Pay attention to the grain, Terry," he'd say. "The wood tells you what it wants to become if you learn to listen." Those lessons in patience, craftsmanship, and respect for materials would shape my approach to business and life. After high school, I earned a partial scholarship to study engineering at the State University. To cover remaining costs, I worked evenings and weekends at a local construction company. The combination of theoretical knowledge and practical experience proved invaluable. I was learning both the technical aspects of construction and how to manage people and projects effectively. During my sophomore year, I met Sarah Williamson in a required communications course. She was stunning, confident, and from a completely different world. Her father owned a successful advertising agency, and she'd grown up in the wealthy part of town with country club memberships and European vacations. Despite our different backgrounds, we connected immediately. She was drawn to my ambition and work ethic, while I was captivated by her social ease and optimistic outlook. We dated throughout college, and I proposed after graduation with a modest diamond that represented 3 months of savings. Sarah said yes enthusiastically, though her parents were noticeably less excited about their daughter marrying someone they considered beneath her social station. "He has potential," I overheard her mother say at our engagement party. "But will he ever provide the lifestyle you're accustomed to?" Those early years were challenging, but happy. We rented a small apartment while I worked for a construction firm, and Sarah took an entry-level position at a marketing company. With my engineering degree and growing experience, I advanced quickly, but Sarah often compared our life unfavorably to that of her friends, whose husbands had inherited family businesses or entered high-paying professions. "When will we be able to buy in River Heights?" she'd ask, referring to the upscale neighborhood where she'd grown up. Or, "The Andersons are spending a month in Italy this summer. When can we travel like that?" I assured her that I had plans for our future, that I was laying foundations for something sustainable rather than flashy. After 3 years of marriage, Sarah became pregnant with Jason. I was ecstatic at the prospect of becoming a father and starting our own family tradition. I had been saving to start my own construction company, but with a baby on the way, I needed more stability. I accepted a management position with a larger firm that offered better benefits and a slight salary increase. Jason was born on a rainy April morning in 2003, a healthy 7-pound boy with Sarah's blue eyes and my dark hair. Holding him, I felt an overwhelming sense of responsibility and pride. This tiny person represented our future, a continuation of the Reynolds name and values. I vowed to give him everything I could, not just materially, but in terms of character and opportunity. When Jason was 2, I finally took the leap and founded Reynolds Construction, using our modest savings and a small business loan. I started with just myself, a pickup truck, and 2 employees. Sarah was initially supportive, but became increasingly frustrated as the business demanded more of my time and our finances remained tight. My father offered to give you a position at his agency, she'd remind me during particularly lean months. We wouldn't have to count every penny. But I was determined to build something of my own, something I could eventually pass down to Jason. The first 3 years were grueling. I worked 16-hour days bidding on small residential projects, delivering quality work on time and within budget, slowly building a reputation. I missed many of Jason's early milestones, a regret that still pains me. Sarah grew increasingly resentful of my absence and our modest lifestyle. Then came the breakthrough. Reynolds Construction won the bid for a significant commercial renovation project that put us on the map. Our reputation for reliability and quality craftsmanship began to attract more prestigious clients. By the time Jason was 7, the company had grown to 30 employees, and we had moved to a larger home in a good neighborhood, though still not the exclusive area Sarah coveted. As the business flourished, our marriage deteriorated. Sarah had everything she had initially wanted, material comforts and social status. But the years of struggle had created a rift between us. She had developed expensive tastes and habits during our newly prosperous period, shopping excessively and redecorating our home multiple times. When I suggested saving for Jason's college fund, instead she dismissed my concerns. "Your priorities are always the business or some future plan," she complained. "Why can't we enjoy what we have now? We've earned it." Our disagreements about money extended to how we raised Jason. I wanted him to understand the value of work and earning. Sarah preferred to give him whatever he wanted. When I suggested Jason do chores for his allowance, Sarah would secretly give him money anyway. When I took him to the construction sites to teach him about the business, Sarah would schedule competing activities with her friends' children. Then I discovered Sarah was having an affair with Richard Bennett, a corporate attorney she'd met through her social circle. Richard represented everything I wasn't: an heir to old money who had never built anything himself. He drove an imported sports car, belonged to the most exclusive clubs, and radiated the kind of polished confidence that comes from never having faced real adversity. The divorce was devastating. Jason was 12, and despite my best efforts to shield him, he witnessed bitter arguments and Sarah's increasingly vindictive behavior. She demanded full custody, painting me as an absentee workaholic father. Her family's connections and Richard's legal expertise resulted in a settlement heavily in Sarah's favor. I was granted only weekend visitation, and the financial settlement nearly crippled both me personally and the company. The irony was crushing. The business I had built to provide for my family became the reason I lost them. The harder I had worked to create something lasting, the more Sarah had resented my dedication. Now the fruits of that labor were being used to finance her new life with Richard. After the divorce, I threw myself into rebuilding the company. I downsized my own living arrangements to a small apartment near the office, worked longer hours than ever, and slowly began to recover financially. But the most painful loss was my relationship with Jason. Sarah would frequently forget about my visitation weekends or schedule competing activities that Jason found more appealing. Phone calls became shorter and less frequent. Over time, my son became a stranger to me. When I did see him, he seemed uncomfortable, as if visiting a distant relative rather than his father. He stopped asking questions about the construction business or the family history that had once fascinated him. Instead, he talked about Richard's connections, their country club membership, and the expensive schools Sarah and Richard were considering for him. I watched helplessly as my son was absorbed into a world of privilege where worth was measured by brand names and social standing rather than character and contribution. The values I had hoped to instill in him, the legacy of the Reynolds family, seemed to be slipping away with each passing month. Little did I know that the true battle for my son's identity and our family's legacy was yet to come. The first year after the divorce, I made every effort to maintain my relationship with Jason. I never missed a scheduled visitation, attended all his school events when permitted, and called regularly, even when he was brief or disinterested. I refused to speak negatively about Sarah or Richard, despite the pain their relationship had caused me. As Jason entered adolescence, the distance between us grew. When he did come for visitations, he would spend most of the time texting friends or complaining about the modest activities I could afford. A fishing trip I had planned for months was cut short because he was bored. A visit to my grandfather's workshop, where I hoped to teach him some basic woodworking, was met with indifference. "Richard is taking me skiing in Aspen next month," he announced during one such visit, barely looking up from his phone. "He says a man should know how to ski properly." I swallowed my hurt. "That sounds like a great opportunity. Maybe when you get back, we could work on that birdhouse project we talked about." Jason rolled his eyes. "Why would I want to build a birdhouse when I could be doing something actually cool?" These interactions became the norm. Jason would arrive at my apartment with the latest expensive gadget, or wearing designer clothes, making it clear that Richard was providing him with a lifestyle I could not match. Sarah encouraged this behavior, often scheduling pickup times earlier than agreed upon, because Jason was bored or had more exciting plans. When Jason turned 14, I made a special effort for his birthday. I had managed to restore my grandfather's vintage truck, the one he had used when starting the family business. It wasn't flashy or expensive, but it represented our heritage, the story of building something from nothing, through hard work and integrity. "I thought we could work on this together," I told Jason, showing him the truck. "In 2 years, when you can drive, it could be yours, a piece of family history." Jason glanced at the truck without enthusiasm. "Richard already said he'd buy me a new car when I turned 16. Something cool, not some old beater." The dismissal of something so meaningful to me was painful, but I persisted. "This isn't just any old truck, Jason. Your great-grandfather used this to start our family business. There's history here, a connection to where we came from." "Why would I care about some ancient history?" he asked. "It's not like it matters now." But it did matter. The Reynolds legacy wasn't just about material possessions. It was about values, about building, rather than consuming, about understanding that things of quality require time and care. These were the lessons I had learned from my father and grandfather, the wisdom I desperately wanted to pass on to my son. Sarah's influence, reinforced by Richard's resources, was reshaping Jason's perception of success and worth. In their world, status was purchased, not earned. Heritage was something to display, not live by. And increasingly, I represented an embarrassing reminder of a less prestigious past. The situation worsened when Sarah and Richard married and moved into a sprawling mansion in River Heights, the exclusive neighborhood Sarah had always coveted. Suddenly, my modest apartment seemed even more inadequate in Jason's eyes. His visits became rarer, often cancelled at the last minute due to social events at the country club or trips on Richard's yacht. During one particularly difficult period, I didn't see Jason for nearly 3 months. Each planned visit was cancelled for increasingly trivial reasons. When I called to speak with him, Sarah would claim he was busy or sleeping or simply not interested in talking. I left messages that went unreturned and sent texts that received brief, disinterested replies. Then came the parent-teacher conference at Jason's prestigious private school, an event I had marked on my calendar months in advance. As the non-custodial parent, I had to specifically request to be informed of such events, and I had arranged to take time off work to attend. When I arrived, I discovered Sarah and Richard already seated with Jason's teachers. Richard, in an expensive suit, was speaking authoritatively about Jason's future college prospects, as if he were the boy's father. Sarah noticed me first, her expression momentarily faltering before she composed herself. "Terry, we didn't expect you," she said, making it clear I was unwelcome. "I RSVP'd weeks ago," I replied, taking the empty seat next to Jason, who barely acknowledged my presence. The conference proceeded awkwardly, with Richard dominating the conversation and referring to Jason as our son. When one teacher addressed me directly about Jason's interest in architecture, Richard interrupted to mention the prestigious summer program he had already arranged through his alumni connections. Afterward, in the parking lot, I approached Jason. "I was thinking we could grab dinner, catch up a bit. It's been a while since we've had time together." Before Jason could respond, Richard placed a hand on his shoulder. "We already have reservations at the club, Terry. Perhaps another time." "Dad," Jason said, addressing Richard. "Not me. We should go, or we'll be late." That single word, Dad, directed at Richard felt like a physical blow. I watched them walk to Richard's luxury sedan, Sarah casting a satisfied glance back at me as they drove away. It was then I realized I wasn't just fighting to maintain a relationship with my son. I was fighting for his very identity, for his understanding of who he was and where he came from. That night, I did something I had avoided since the divorce. I drove to my old neighborhood and parked across from what had once been our family home. Sarah had sold it after moving in with Richard, and a new family lived there now. Lights glowed warmly in the windows, and children's bicycles lay on the front lawn. I remembered building that lawn, laying the sod, with Jason helping, as a toddler, his tiny hands patting down the earth. I pulled out my phone and texted Jason. "I miss you, son. No matter what happens, I will always be your dad, and I will always love you." I waited for a reply that never came. The next day I called Murray Goldman, my family's attorney for over 30 years. I needed to prepare for what I feared was coming, a complete severance of my son from his heritage, not just emotionally but legally. Murray listened quietly as I explained the situation, his voice grave when he finally spoke. "Terry, you need to think carefully about this. What you're proposing is significant." "I know," I replied. "But Jason needs to understand that names and legacies aren't just things you can trade in for a more attractive model. They carry responsibilities and values. If he chooses to walk away from that, he needs to understand what he's truly giving up." After our conversation, Murray began preparing the documents I requested, though he made his reservations clear. "I hope you know what you're doing, Terry. This kind of lesson could backfire." "It's a risk I have to take," I told him. "Sometimes the most valuable lessons are the hardest ones." Little did I know how soon those documents would be needed, or how dramatically they would change all our lives. The Reynolds name has never been associated with vast wealth or social prominence, but it has always represented something more: enduring integrity, craftsmanship, and a legacy of building both structures and community. This heritage began with my great-grandfather, James Reynolds, who arrived in America in 1892 with little more than his toolbox and determination. James had been a carpenter's apprentice in England before seeking opportunity across the Atlantic. He settled in our Midwest town and quickly established a reputation for exceptional workmanship. Operating from a small workshop, he crafted furniture, repaired homes, and slowly built a clientele who valued quality over cost. His simple philosophy, "Build it right or don't build it at all," became the unofficial motto of what would become the Reynolds business tradition. My grandfather, Walter Reynolds, expanded on James's foundation during the challenging years of the Great Depression. While many businesses failed, Walter's carpentry shop diversified into small construction projects, building and repairing homes for those who could still afford it. He introduced an innovative payment plan that allowed people to pay in installments, sometimes with goods or services instead of cash. This flexibility, combined with unwavering quality, allowed the business to survive when many others collapsed. Walter also began a practice that would become central to the Reynolds legacy, quietly purchasing small parcels of land whenever possible. "Land is the one thing they aren't making any more of," he would say. These modest investments made during economic downturns when prices were low would prove remarkably prescient as the town grew into a thriving city over the decades. My father, Theodore Reynolds, took the small construction company and expanded it into a respected regional firm during the post-war building boom. Reynolds Construction became known for schools, libraries, and community buildings that combined functionality with thoughtful design. My father believed that buildings should serve the people who used them, not just the clients who commissioned them. This philosophy sometimes meant lower profits, but resulted in structures that became beloved community landmarks. Theodore also continued Walter's land investment strategy, gradually accumulating properties throughout the region. He established the Reynolds Family Trust to manage these holdings, ensuring they would benefit future generations. This was never done ostentatiously or with fanfare. In fact, most people, including Sarah during our marriage, had no idea of the true extent of the family's holdings. The most treasured possessions in our family weren't expensive or showy. My great-grandfather's original toolbox with tools worn smooth from decades of use was displayed prominently in my father's office and later in mine. The family pocket watch, passed from father to son for 4 generations, was a simple timepiece whose value came from its history rather than its materials. And most importantly, the bound ledgers documenting the business from its first job to the present day were kept meticulously, a tangible record of promises made and kept. I grew up immersed in these traditions, working summers at construction sites, learning not just how to build structures, but how to build relationships based on trust and fairness. My father insisted I start at the bottom, hauling lumber and cleaning up sites, before gradually teaching me estimating, project management, and the human side of the business. "The Reynolds name means something in this town," he would remind me. "When people hire us, they're not just paying for a building, they're buying our word that it will be done right. That reputation took 3 generations to build, but it could be lost in 1 if we forget what matters." When I took over the company, after my father's retirement, I continued these traditions. Reynolds Construction remained mid-sized by choice, focusing on quality projects rather than volume. I expanded our focus on sustainable building practices and restoration of historic structures areas that required specialized skills and brought particular satisfaction. What Sarah never fully understood, and what Jason had never been taught due to our separation, was that Reynolds Construction was merely the visible part of our family's legacy. The true wealth of the Reynolds family lay in the extensive real estate holdings, carefully managed investments, and the trust established by my grandfather and father. These assets were substantial but intentionally understated, reflecting our family's belief that wealth should be utilized responsibly rather than displayed conspicuously. After Jason was born, I had worked with Murray Goldman to establish a separate trust specifically for my son's future. This trust included funds for education, seed money for entrepreneurial ventures, and eventually a significant portion of the family's assets. The intent was never to give Jason unfettered wealth, but to provide him with opportunities while also teaching him the responsibilities that came with the Reynolds legacy. However, there was a specific clause in the trust documents that Murray had initially questioned. All benefits were explicitly tied to the Reynolds name and the values it represented. This wasn't about control or ego. It was about ensuring that the resources would support the continuation of what my ancestors had built, not just materially, but ethically. "Are you sure about this provision?" Murray had asked when we finalized the documents. "It's unusual to make inheritance conditional on a name." "The name is just a symbol," I explained. "It's what it represents that matters. If Jason doesn't want to be part of that tradition, if he doesn't value what we've built and why we built it, then the resources would be wasted on him anyway." After the divorce, I had worried increasingly about Jason's exposure to values so different from those I had hoped to instill. Richard's influence troubled me deeply. It wasn't just his wealth or the material advantages he provided. It was his fundamental belief that worth came from status rather than character, from what you possessed rather than what you contributed. During one of my conversations with Murray about updating my will, I confided these concerns. "I'm losing him, Murray. Sarah and Richard are teaching him that appearances matter more than substance, that the Reynolds name and everything it stands for is something to be ashamed of, rather than proud of." Murray, who had known me since I was Jason's age, understood completely. "What are you planning to do about it?" "I'm not sure yet," I admitted, "but I need to be prepared if Jason decides to reject his heritage entirely. It would break my heart, but he needs to understand that choices have consequences, that you can't simply discard generations of legacy when something more attractive comes along." That conversation led to the creation of the documents that would soon become central to the most painful and important lesson I would ever teach my son. The morning Jason arrived at my office with Sarah and Richard in tow, I knew something significant was about to happen. They hadn't called ahead to schedule a meeting, which was unusual and deliberate, likely calculated to catch me off guard. I was reviewing project estimates when my assistant knocked on my door. "Mr. Reynolds, your ex-wife is here with your son and another gentleman. They're insisting on seeing you immediately." I took a deep breath, saved my work, and nodded. "Send them in, please." They entered like a conquering army. Sarah wore an expensive designer outfit that probably cost more than what most of my employees earned in a month. Richard was immaculate in a tailored suit, his demeanor oozing condescension as he glanced around my practical, modest office. Jason, now 16, and almost my height, stood between them, wearing an expression that mixed defiance with uncertainty. "Terry," Sarah began without preamble, "we have something important to discuss." I gestured toward the chairs opposite my desk. "Please sit down." Richard remained standing, a power play I recognized from countless negotiations with difficult clients. Sarah sat with practiced grace, while Jason reluctantly took the remaining chair. "Jason has made an important decision," Sarah continued, placing her hand on our son's shoulder. "We've discussed it thoroughly as a family, and we're here to inform you." I noticed her emphasis on family, deliberately excluding me from that definition. I looked directly at Jason. "What decision is that, son?" Jason avoided my eyes, staring instead at a point just above my shoulder. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a rehearsed quality. "I don't want your last name anymore. Richard says you're a loser, and I should take a real man's name. I want to be Jason Bennett." The words struck like physical blows, each one carefully chosen to wound. I saw Richard's slight smirk, Sarah's satisfied smile. This moment had been orchestrated to hurt me, to publicly sever the bond between father and son. In that instant, several possible reactions flashed through my mind. I could argue, plead, or express the pain I felt. I could remind Jason of our family history and the meaning behind the name he so casually wanted to discard. I could point out Richard's manipulation and Sarah's vindictiveness. Instead, I remembered my father's words from years ago. A Reynolds responds to challenges with dignity, not drama. I also recalled something my grandfather had told me. A name is only worth something when the person carrying it makes it worth something. I looked at my son, seeing both the child I had loved from his first breath and the confused young man he had become under influences I could not control. And I made a decision that would change all our lives. Without displaying the emotion churning inside me, I opened my desk drawer and removed a folder Murray had prepared months earlier just in case this day ever came. "I understand," I said calmly. "If that's what you want, Jason, I won't stand in your way." My measured response clearly surprised them. Sarah's triumphant expression faltered slightly. Richard looked momentarily uncertain, having expected an emotional outburst he could use against me later. I removed several documents from the folder, placing them on the desk. "These papers will formalize your decision," I explained, my voice steady. "They'll need to be signed by both you and your mother, since you're still a minor." "You're agreeing?" Sarah asked, confusion evident in her tone. "Jason is old enough to make choices about his identity," I replied. "If he feels the Bennett name better represents who he is or who he wants to become, I won't force him to carry a name he doesn't value." Richard, quick to regain his composure, placed his hand on Jason's shoulder. "Well, that's surprisingly reasonable of you, Terry. I'm glad we could handle this maturely." I slid the papers across the desk along with a pen. "These documents officially change Jason's surname from Reynolds to Bennett and acknowledge the implications of that change." "Implications?" Sarah asked, picking up the first page. "Legal formalities," I said simply. "Murray drew them up to ensure everything is properly documented." Richard, ever the attorney, reached for the papers. "Let me review these first." "Of course," I agreed. "Take your time." But Richard only skimmed the documents, too confident in his legal expertise and too eager for this victory to read them thoroughly. His superficial review missed the crucial details buried in the legal language, exactly as Murray had predicted. "These appear to be standard name change forms," Richard announced, handing them to Sarah. "Nothing unusual." Sarah barely glanced at them before passing them to Jason. "Sign where indicated, honey. Then we can put this whole Reynolds business behind us." Jason hesitated, pen hovering over the signature line. For a moment, I saw uncertainty in his eyes, perhaps a flicker of understanding that this moment carried more weight than he had been led to believe. "Are you sure this is what you want, Jason?" I asked quietly. "A name isn't just a label. It connects you to a history, to people who came before you." Richard interjected before Jason could respond. "It connects him to you, you mean? And frankly, what has that connection gotten him? A father who lost everything in the divorce, a shabby apartment and weekend visits to construction sites. The Bennett name opens doors, provides opportunities." I kept my eyes on Jason. "Is that how you see it, son? Is the Reynolds name something to be ashamed of?" Jason finally met my gaze, and I saw confusion beneath the bravado. I want to fit in with my real family," he said, the words clearly echoing phrases he'd heard from Sarah and Richard. His use of real family stung, but I maintained my composure. "Then you should sign," I said simply. "A name should reflect who you are and who you choose to be." With that final push, Jason signed his name the last time he would legally write Jason Reynolds. Sarah signed next, her signature flourishing with satisfaction. I signed last, officially acknowledging the change. As I gathered the papers, making a copy for them to take, Richard couldn't resist a final jab. "Well, that was painless. I expected more resistance from you, Terry. Perhaps you're finally accepting reality." I handed the copies to Sarah. "Reality is rarely what it appears on the surface, Richard. I hope you've all carefully considered what this change means." "It means my son is finally fully part of my family," Sarah replied, standing to leave. He's a Bennet now, not a Reynolds. As they prepared to exit, I spoke one last time to Jason. I hope you'll be happy with your choice, Jason. I truly do. And remember, whatever name you carry, you're still my son. Jason looked uncomfortable, perhaps expecting more of a fight or more visible hurt from me. The lack of drama seemed to confuse him more than any argument would have. Let's go, Richard said firmly, guiding them toward the door. We have a lunch reservation to celebrate. I watched them leave, maintaining my professional demeanor, until the door closed behind them. Only then did I allow myself to feel the full weight of what had just occurred. My son had rejected not just my name, but everything it represented, all the history and values I had hoped to pass on to him. I picked up the phone and dialed Murray's number. "It's done," I said when he answered. "They signed, all of them." "They didn't read it carefully?" Murray asked, sounding concerned. "Richard skimmed it. Sarah barely looked at it. Jason just wanted it over with." Murray sighed heavily. "Are you sure about this, Terry? It's not too late to tear up the papers." "No," I replied, looking at the framed photo of Jason and me from happier times. "Some lessons can only be learned the hard way. Give them a week, then make the call." After hanging up, I sat alone in my office, surrounded by the symbols of the Reynolds legacy, a heritage my son had just signed away without understanding its true value. The pain was profound, but beneath it lay hope that through this difficult lesson, Jason might eventually come to understand what truly matters in life and legacy. For the next week, I immersed myself in work, taking on additional responsibilities and staying late at the office to keep my mind occupied. I didn't call Jason, though every fiber of my being wanted to reach out. This separation was necessary for the lesson to take hold, for him to feel the weight of his decision before understanding its full implications. Each evening I would return to my apartment and look at the family photos I kept on my mantel. Generations of Reynolds men standing proudly in front of their work. My great-grandfather beside the town's first library. My grandfather at the groundbreaking for the community center. My father at the ribbon cutting for the children's hospital wing Reynolds Construction had built at cost. And me holding a toddler Jason at the dedication of the Veterans Memorial we had constructed. These images told a story, not just of buildings erected, but of a family committed to constructing a community, to building something larger than themselves. It was this legacy more than any material inheritance that I had hoped to pass on to my son. The money and property were secondary to the values they represented. On the 7th day after Jason signed the papers, Murray made the call we had discussed. I wasn't present, but he recounted the conversation in detail afterward. Sarah had answered, her voice confident and dismissive when she realized who was calling. "Murray, if this is about trying to reverse Jason's name change, you're wasting your time. It's done." "Actually, Mrs. Bennet," Murray replied formally. "I'm calling in my capacity as trustee of the Reynolds Family Trust to inform you of some significant developments resulting from the documents you and Jason signed last week." There was a pause before Sarah responded, her tone now cautious. "What developments? Those were just name change forms." Murray's voice took on the formal cadence he used for legal matters. "The documents included several clauses beyond the name change itself. By signing them, you and Jason acknowledged and accepted certain legal consequences tied to his voluntary disassociation from the Reynolds family." "What are you talking about?" Richard reviewed those papers. "There was nothing unusual in them. With all due respect, Mrs. Bennet, the implications were clearly stated on pages 3 and 4, sections 12 through 17. By renouncing the Reynolds name, Jason has also legally withdrawn from all trusts, inheritances, and future interests connected to the Reynolds family and its holdings." There was a long silence before Sarah spoke again, her voice now tinged with uncertainty. Murray, stop playing games. What exactly are you saying? Murray later told me his hand was shaking as he delivered the news, not from fear, but from the gravity of the moment. I'm saying, Mrs. Bennet, that Jason has signed away his inheritance. The education trust established for him, the proprietary interest in Reynolds Construction, and his future position as beneficiary of the Reynolds Family Trust, which includes extensive real estate holdings, investment portfolios, and other assets. That's impossible, Sarah gasped. That would be... How much are we talking about? Murray cleared his throat. The current value of Jason's interests that have now been legally diverted to contingent beneficiaries would be approximately $73 million. The phone apparently clattered to the floor at this point. Murray could hear Sarah shouting for Richard in the background, panic evident in her voice. When Richard came on the line, his attorney persona was in full force. Goldman's, what kind of scam is Terry trying to pull? Those documents couldn't possibly have been legally binding for something of this magnitude. Mr. Bennet, I assure you the documents were properly executed, witnessed, and entirely legal. They explicitly stated that by changing his name, Jason was voluntarily removing himself from all Reynolds family trusts and inheritance structures. There was nothing hidden or deceptive. The language was clear to anyone who read it carefully. This is fraud, Richard blustered. Coercion of a minor. We'll have this overturned by tomorrow. Murray's voice remained steady. The documents included affidavits, signed by both you and Mrs. Bennet, stating that Jason was making this decision of his own free will without pressure and with full understanding of the consequences. You both certified that you had read and understood all provisions. If you're now claiming you signed legal documents without reading them, that would be concerning for someone in your profession, Mr. Bennet. I want copies of everything sent to my office immediately, Richard demanded. And tell Terry to expect a call from my attorney. Of course, Murray replied. I'll have everything delivered this afternoon. And Mr. Bennet, you should know that the Reynolds Family Trust has strict contestation provisions. Any legal challenge automatically triggers a complete lockdown of all assets for a minimum of 7 years, while the matter is resolved, during which time no distributions of any kind can be made to any party. After ending the call, Murray immediately contacted me. It's done, he said gravely. They know. How did they take it? I asked, though I could imagine. About as expected. Shock, denial, anger. Richard is threatening legal action, of course. Let him, I replied. Every document was properly executed and transparently written. If he failed to read what he was signing, that's on him. Terry, Murray said hesitantly. I've known you since you were Jason's age. Are you sure this is the right approach? 73 million is a lot to teach a lesson. This isn't about the money, Murray. It never was. It's about understanding that heritage isn't something you can discard when something shinier comes along. Jason needs to learn that actions have consequences, that what we build over generations has value beyond dollar signs. And if he never comes back, if this drives him away permanently, I had asked myself the same question countless times over the previous week. Then at least he'll have made a genuine choice, not one based on Richard's manipulation or Sarah's vindictiveness. And the foundation my great-grandfather started will continue through other channels, supporting the community, as it always has. After hanging up, I sat at my desk, mentally preparing for the storm I knew was coming. It wouldn't be pleasant, but sometimes the most important lessons require the most difficult experiences. I only hoped that someday Jason would understand what this was really about. The aftermath of Murray's call was as immediate as it was explosive. Within hours, Richard was at my office door, bypassing my assistant and bursting in without announcement. His carefully cultivated professional demeanor had vanished, replaced by raw fury. "You manipulative bastard!" he snarled, slamming his hands on my desk. What kind of father tricks his own son out of his inheritance? I remained seated, maintaining the calm I had practiced for this moment. I didn't trick anyone, Richard. The documents were clear. You chose not to read them carefully. That's a surprising oversight for an attorney of your standing. We're contesting this immediately. You can't seriously expect this to hold up in court. You're welcome to try, I replied evenly. But as Murray probably explained, any legal challenge triggers the trust's contestation clause. Everything freezes for at least 7 years during litigation. No assets distributed to anyone. Is that really how you want to spend the next phase of your life? In courtrooms, Richard's face flushed deeper. This isn't about the money. It's about your manipulative tactics. I couldn't help but laugh at the absurdity of his statement. Not about the money. Would you be standing in my office right now if Jason had signed away $100 instead of $73 million? Let's at least be honest with each other, Richard. He adjusted his tie, trying to regain his composure. You've made a serious mistake, Terry. This will destroy any relationship you might have salvaged with Jason. That's a risk I'm willing to take. Sometimes the most important lessons come at the highest cost. I stood up, signaling the conversation was ending. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a business to run. Richard left with a final threat about unleashing his legal team, but I could see uncertainty beneath his bluster. He knew the documents were legally sound. His anger stemmed not from righteous indignation, but from having been outmaneuvered at his own game. Sarah's response came next, not in person, but through a series of increasingly desperate phone calls. The first was all rage and accusations reminiscent of our worst arguments during the divorce. The second included tears and attempts at emotional manipulation, reminding me of all we once meant to each other, and how this would devastate our son. The third was more calculating, offering compromises and partial restorations of visitation rights I had been previously denied. I listened to each message, but didn't return the calls. This wasn't a negotiation or a game. It was a lesson about consequences, about understanding the true value of a name and the legacy it carries. The most difficult moment came 3 days after Murray's call, when Jason showed up at my apartment alone. He looked exhausted, his eyes red-rimmed and his usual confident demeanor replaced by confusion and hurt. When I opened the door, he stood uncertainly in the hallway. "Can I come in?" he asked, his voice smaller than I had heard it in years. I stepped aside, allowing him to enter the modest space that had been his second home since the divorce, though he had visited less and less frequently in recent years. He glanced around as if seeing it for the first time, taking in the family photos and the simple, functional furniture. "Why did you do it?" he asked, finally turning to face me. "Why did you trick me?" I gestured for him to sit down, taking the chair opposite him. "I didn't trick you, Jason. Everything was clearly stated in the documents you signed. You chose not to read them carefully. I'm 16. I didn't know I was signing away millions of dollars. And whose fault is that?" I asked gently. "Who taught you to sign legal documents without understanding what they contained? Who encouraged you to make a life-altering decision without fully considering the consequences?" He looked away, unable to hold my gaze. "Richard said it was just formalities. Mom said you'd probably make a scene, but would have to accept it eventually. And you believed them without question. You were willing to discard 4 generations of family history because Richard told you I was a loser. You were ready to reject everything the Reynolds name stands for because it wasn't as flashy or prestigious as Bennett." "It wasn't like that," he protested weakly. "Wasn't it, 'I don't want your last name anymore. My new dad says you're a loser, and I should take a real man's name'?" Those were your exact words, Jason. You chose them deliberately to hurt me. He had no response to hearing his own words repeated back to him. After a long moment, he asked, "So what happens now?" Is it all gone? Everything. I studied my son, seeing beneath the hurt and anger to the confusion of a boy caught between adult agendas. The Reynolds family assets are no longer available to you, yes. The education trust, the proprietary interest in the company, the real estate holdings, all of it now passes to contingent beneficiaries according to the trust provisions. So I'm left with nothing. His voice cracked slightly on the last word. You're left with exactly what you chose, Jason. You decided the Bennett name was worth more to you than the Reynolds heritage. You have Richard's connections, Sarah's support, and whatever advantages come with the name you preferred. He stood up abruptly, anger replacing hurt. You did this to punish me, to get back at Mom and Richard. I remained seated, keeping my voice calm. No, Jason. I did this to teach you something important. Names aren't just labels to be swapped out when something better comes along. They carry history, values, responsibility. The Reynolds name represents 4 generations of building, of community contribution, of doing things the right way, even when it's harder. You decided that meant nothing to you. Actions have consequences. So that's it. I made one mistake, and you're cutting me off forever. Tears were forming in his eyes now. I felt my resolve weakening at the sight of my son's pain, but I held firm. I didn't cut you off, Jason. You signed yourself away. There's a difference. And as for forever, well, that depends on what you learn from this. What's that supposed to mean? He asked, wiping his eyes roughly with his sleeve. It means that while the legal documents are binding, life is long and paths can change. The money and assets aren't what matter most. It's the understanding of what they represent, what they were built for. He shook his head in frustration. So this is some kind of test jump through Dad's hoops, and maybe someday he'll let me back into the precious Reynolds Club. No, it's a lesson. Perhaps the most important one I could teach you. What you do with it is entirely up to you. Jason left shortly after, still angry and confused, but perhaps with the first seeds of understanding planted. As I watched him walk to his car, a new model that Richard had likely provided, I wondered if I had made the right choice. The pain of seeing him hurting was almost unbearable, but I remembered my father's words about difficult decisions and necessary lessons. That evening I called Murray again. Jason came to see me today. How did it go? He asked, concern evident in his voice. About as well as could be expected. He's angry, hurt, confused. Are you still certain this was the right approach? I sighed deeply. No, but I'm certain it was necessary. He needs to understand that some things, once given away, can't simply be reclaimed with an apology or a change of mind. Some decisions have lasting consequences. And what happens now? Now, I replied, looking at the family photos on my wall. We wait to see what kind of man Jason chooses to become, with or without the Reynolds name. In the weeks following the confrontation, a noticeable shift occurred in the Bennett household. Sarah and Richard's relationship, already strained by his controlling nature, and her spending habits deteriorated rapidly under the weight of their mutual recriminations. According to Murray, who heard through legal circles, their arguments became increasingly public and bitter. Richard blamed Sarah for not reading the documents more carefully. Sarah blamed Richard for his legal incompetence in missing such significant clauses. Both blamed each other for encouraging Jason to change his name without fully understanding the consequences. The loss of $73 million in potential assets was a wound neither of their egos could easily absorb. More troubling for them was the discovery that Richard's financial situation wasn't as solid as he had projected. His law practice was successful, but his lifestyle had always exceeded his actual income. The mansion in River Heights, the luxury cars, the country club memberships, the exotic vacations. All these had been maintained through increasing levels of debt and the anticipation of future earning. Richard had been counting on Jason's inheritance, at least subconsciously, as a future safety net. The revelation that this anticipated windfall was now permanently beyond reach forced a harsh reassessment of their financial reality. Rumors circulated that credit card debt had mounted and that the mortgage on their mansion was underwater following a market downturn. Jason, meanwhile, found himself in an increasingly uncomfortable position at home. The once doting attention from Richard cooled considerably. Where previously Richard had been eager to include Jason in activities and introduce him as "my son," he now became distant and irritable, often criticizing Jason for minor infractions. "You're becoming just as irresponsible as your father," Richard reportedly snapped when Jason left lights on in his bedroom. The comparison to me, once the ultimate insult in their household, revealed how dramatically perceptions had shifted. Sarah, caught between her son and her husband, attempted to maintain appearances, but the strain showed in her increasingly anxious behavior and renewed dependence on anti-anxiety medication. The perfect life she had constructed began showing cracks that no amount of social posturing could disguise. I learned most of these details not directly from Jason, but through mutual acquaintances and Murray's connections. I maintained my distance, allowing the situation to unfold without my intervention. This wasn't about revenge or satisfaction at their difficulties. It was about Jason experiencing the reality behind the facade, understanding the shallow nature of relationships built on material advantage rather than genuine connection. Approximately 2 months after signing the papers, Jason made his next move. He appeared at my office unannounced one Tuesday afternoon, looking noticeably different. Gone were the designer clothes and carefully styled hair that had become his uniform at the Bennett household. Instead, he wore jeans and a simple button-down shirt, his hair unstyled and his expression serious. "Do you have a few minutes?" he asked from my doorway, none of the previous anger evident in his voice. I nodded, setting aside the project plans I had been reviewing. "Of course, come in." He sat across from me, his posture tense but determined. "I've been doing some research," he began, "about the Reynolds family, about great-grandpa James and Grandpa Walter, and the company history." This surprised me. "What kind of research?" "I went to the Historical Society, looked through their archives. I found articles about the buildings Reynolds Construction has worked on over the years. I talked to Mr. Peterson at the library about the reading room great-grandpa James built during the Depression. I listened without interrupting, curious about where this was leading. Did you know they named the children's wing at the community center after Grandpa Walter? For all the work he did with the youth programs," Jason continued. "There's a plaque there with the Reynolds motto, 'Build it right or don't build it at all.'" "I helped install that plaque," I said quietly. "Your grandfather was there for the dedication just a few months before he passed away." Jason nodded, absorbing this information. "I also found some articles about anonymous donations to the college scholarship fund, the homeless shelter renovations, the Veterans Housing Project. The timing matches up with when you sold the lakefront property 5 years ago." I neither confirmed nor denied his implication, simply waiting for him to continue. "Richard lost his job," Jason finally said, changing direction abruptly. "The firm found out he was borrowing from client accounts. They gave him the option to resign instead of being reported to the Bar Association. This was news to me, but I kept my expression neutral. "I'm sorry to hear that. It must be difficult at home right now." Jason let out a bitter laugh. "Home? That's a joke. They fight constantly. Mom cries all the time. Richard drinks and blames everyone else for his problems." He looked down at his hands. "He hit her last week, when she questioned some charge on the credit card statement. I got between them and he told me I was just as worthless as my loser father." My heart clenched at the thought of Sarah being abused, and Jason witnessing such violence. "Jason, if Sarah is in danger, she's staying with her sister for now," he interjected. "I've been sleeping at my friend Mike's house. Richard doesn't even notice I'm gone most nights." "What can I do to help?" I asked, setting aside all other concerns in the face of their immediate safety. Jason looked up, his expression a mix of determination and vulnerability that reminded me powerfully of the little boy he had once been. "I made a mistake," he said simply. "A huge, stupid mistake. I let Richard convince me that the Reynolds name wasn't worth anything, that you were a nobody compared to him. I wanted to hurt you because I was angry that you weren't the one driving the fancy car or living in the big house." "Jason, no, please let me finish," he insisted. "I've been thinking about this a lot. The Reynolds name isn't just a label. It's 4 generations of building things that matter, of doing right by people, even when it's harder or less profitable. It's about character and values, not money or status." I felt a surge of pride at hearing my son articulate the very principles I had hoped to instill in him. That's true. I know I can't undo what I did legally. The inheritance is gone, and I accept that. But I want you to know that I understand now what I threw away. And it wasn't the money. It was the connection to something real and lasting. For the first time in our conversation, I allowed my emotion to show. That connection isn't gone, Jason. It can't be signed away on a piece of paper. It's in your DNA, in the values I tried to teach you, in the history you're now discovering for yourself. "What happens now?" he asked, echoing his question from our previous conversation, but with a different meaning behind it. "That depends on what you want to happen," I replied carefully. Jason sat straighter in his chair. "I want to learn. About the business, about the family history, about all the things I should have been interested in before. Not because of any inheritance, but because it's my heritage regardless of what name I'm using now." I considered his words, searching for any sign of manipulation or insincerity, but found only earnest determination. "It won't be easy. If you're serious, you'd start at the bottom just like I did, just like every Reynolds has. No special treatment." "I don't want special treatment," he replied quickly. "I want to earn whatever comes next. I want to build something like Great-Grandpa James did." For the first time in months, I felt genuine hope for my son's future and for our relationship. "Then we start tomorrow. Be here at 7. Wear clothes you don't mind getting dirty. You'll be working with the site cleanup crew at the hospital renovation project." Jason nodded, accepting these terms without complaint. As he stood to leave, he hesitated, then asked, "Dad, is there any way I could ever be a Reynolds again?" "Legally, I mean." I met his gaze steadily. "Names can be changed on paper, Jason. But becoming a true Reynolds isn't about legal documents. It's about living the values, doing the work, building something worthwhile. Show me who you really want to be, and we'll worry about the paperwork later." He nodded again, a small smile forming. "Thank you for the lesson. It was expensive, but I needed it." After he left, I sat in my office for a long time thinking about the journey we had both taken to reach this point. The pain and separation had been necessary for Jason to recognize the true value of his heritage. Now the real work of rebuilding both our relationship and his connection to the Reynolds legacy could begin. 1 year can change many things. In the months following Jason's decision to reconnect with his heritage, a remarkable transformation took place not just in him, but in all our lives. True to his word, Jason showed up at my office at 7 the next morning, dressed in work clothes and ready to begin. I assigned him to the cleanup crew at our hospital renovation project, the most physically demanding and least glamorous position available. For a teenager accustomed to privilege, it was a harsh introduction to the realities of construction work. Mark Rodriguez, the crew supervisor, and a 20-year veteran with Reynolds Construction, later told me that he expected Jason to last 3 days at most. "Rich kids always quit when they realize how hard the work actually is," he said. "But your boy surprised me. He never complained, never asked for special treatment, just put his head down and did whatever was asked of him." That first week, Jason came home with blistered hands, aching muscles, and a newfound respect for the physical labor that formed the foundation of our family business. Instead of giving up, he asked for work gloves and returned the next day with even greater determination. Meanwhile, Sarah's situation continued to deteriorate. Richard's financial and professional collapse accelerated with rumors of an ethics investigation by the Bar Association. The mansion in River Heights was officially listed for sale, though at a price well below what they had paid for it. Sarah moved permanently to her sister's house, finally acknowledging that her marriage was beyond saving. One evening, about 3 weeks after Jason began working for Reynolds Construction, Sarah called me. It was our first direct conversation in nearly a year that wasn't conducted through attorneys. "Terry," she began, her voice lacking its usual defensive edge, "I need to talk to you about Jason." I braced myself for accusations or demands. "What about him?" "He's different, in a good way. He comes home exhausted but satisfied. He talks about the projects he's working on with real interest. He's not constantly on his phone or complaining about being bored." She paused. "Whatever you're doing, it's working." Her admission surprised me. "I'm not doing anything special, Sarah. Just giving him the opportunity to discover who he really is and what he's capable of." "I was wrong," she said suddenly. "About so many things. About you, about what would make Jason happy, about what kind of life would fulfill me." Her voice cracked slightly. "I thought status and money were the path to happiness. Richard seemed to represent everything I thought I wanted." "Sarah, no, please let me finish. I need to say this. I encouraged Jason to reject you and everything you stand for, because I was bitter and resentful. I wanted to hurt you by taking away the one thing I knew mattered most to you. I never stopped to consider what that would do to Jason." Her honesty was unexpected and affecting. "We both made mistakes, Sarah. What matters now is how we move forward for Jason's sake." "That's why I'm calling," she continued. "Richard is contesting the divorce. He's making threats about Jason, saying he'll fight for custody, just to spite me, even though he barely acknowledges Jason's existence these days. I'm afraid of what he might do." "What do you need from me?" I asked, setting aside old grievances in the face of her obvious distress. "Support, legal help, advice." She sounded exhausted. "I don't have anyone else to turn to. My family tried to warn me about Richard from the beginning, and I was too proud to admit they were right." I thought carefully before responding. "Murray Goldman is an excellent attorney. He can help with the divorce proceedings and any custody issues, though. Jason is nearly 17 now, and courts generally consider the preferences of older teenagers. As for support..." I hesitated, then made a decision. "There's a property in Riverside Heights, a smaller house, but in a good neighborhood near Jason's school. It's one of the Reynolds Trust holdings, currently between tenants. You and Jason are welcome to use it until things stabilize." Her gratitude was palpable, as was her surprise at the offer. "Terry, I don't know what to say. After everything that's happened, why would you help me? Because regardless of our past, you're Jason's mother. His well-being is tied to yours. And perhaps it's time we all focused on building something positive instead of tearing each other down." That conversation marked the beginning of a cautious new chapter in our complicated family story. Sarah and Jason moved into the Riverside Heights house the following week. It was modest compared to the mansion they had left behind, but it was safe, comfortable, and free from Richard's increasingly erratic behavior. As summer turned to fall, Jason continued working at Reynolds Construction, advancing from cleanup to more skilled positions as he demonstrated aptitude and commitment. He applied the same determination to his schoolwork, bringing his grades up significantly and beginning to research college programs in engineering and business management. Sarah, too, made significant changes. She took a position with a local non-profit organization using her marketing background to help promote community development initiatives. The work paid far less than her previous corporate role, but provided a sense of purpose she had been lacking. More importantly, she began rebuilding her relationship with Jason, this time based on genuine connection rather than materialistic values. Richard's downfall continued with the ethics investigation, resulting in a suspension of his law license. He fought the divorce viciously, but had little leverage given his diminished circumstances and the evidence of his abusive behavior. When the proceedings finally concluded, he left town, reportedly moving to Florida to work at a friend's real estate agency. Throughout this period, I maintained a careful balance, supportive, but not overreaching, available, but not intrusive. I wanted Jason's return to the Reynolds values to be his own choice, not something imposed or manipulated. The same applied to my evolving relationship with Sarah, which gradually transformed from antagonistic ex-spouses to cautious co-parents united by concern for our son. On Jason's 17th birthday, I invited him to the old workshop, where my grandfather had taught me woodworking. It had been preserved largely as it was during Walter's time, with the original tools still hanging on the walls and the workbench scarred by decades of projects. I thought we might build something together. I suggested showing him a set of plans for a simple but elegant writing desk. Your great-grandfather made one like this for each of his children when they turned 17. Your grandfather made one for me. I made one for you years ago, but I trailed off, not needing to explain that the desk had been left behind in the divorce, another casualty of our family's fracturing. Jason examined the plans with genuine interest. I'd like that, though I should warn you I've never done fine woodworking before. Neither had any of us at your age, I replied. That's why it's a tradition. You learn by doing, by making mistakes and correcting them by seeing a project through from raw materials to finished piece. We spent the next several weekends working on the desk together. I taught him how to select lumber, how to measure and cut precisely how to join pieces so they would withstand decades of use. Each session was an opportunity not just for teaching woodworking skills, but for sharing family stories, explaining the values that had guided the Reynolds men through 4 generations. As the desk neared completion, I decided it was time for a more formal discussion about the future. After a productive Saturday in the workshop, I invited Jason to my office at Reynolds Construction, where I had prepared a small celebration. The office was transformed for the occasion. I had gathered family photographs, historical documents and artifacts spanning the Reynolds history, creating a visual timeline of our legacy. The original ledger books from James Reynolds's first jobs sat alongside architectural drawings from Theodore's projects and photographs of buildings I had constructed. "What's all this?" Jason asked, taking in the display with obvious curiosity. "Our history. Your history." I gestured to the family tree mounted on the wall, tracing from James Reynolds in the 1890s down through the generations. I wanted you to see it all in one place, to understand the continuity. Jason studied the documents carefully, pausing at a photograph of himself as a toddler, sitting on my shoulders at a construction site. "I remember this. You let me wear your hard hat. You insisted on it." I smiled at the memory. "You told everyone you were going to build the biggest building ever when you grew up." He moved along the timeline, asking questions about various projects and family members, absorbing the rich history he had once rejected. When he reached the end of the display, he noticed something unexpected. His name was still on the Reynolds family tree, not crossed out or removed, despite his legal name change. "You kept me on here," he said quietly. "Of course, legal documents don't determine family. Blood and values do." I moved to my desk and opened a drawer, removing a small box. "That's actually what I wanted to talk to you about today." Inside the box was the Reynolds family pocket watch, passed down through 4 generations of firstborn sons. Simple in design, but exquisitely crafted, it had been carried by James during his journey to America, by Walter through 2 world wars, by Theodore through the building boom that established our company's reputation, and by me through the growth and challenges of my own career. "This was supposed to be yours on your 18th birthday." I explained, opening the case to reveal the inscription inside, "Time builds all things of value." "I'm giving it to you now because I believe you've earned it, regardless of the name you currently carry." Jason took the watch reverently, understanding its significance. "But the inheritance, the trust funds, all of that, is still gone, right? Legally, I mean." "Yes, those documents remain binding. The financial aspects of the Reynolds legacy are no longer available to you under current arrangements." He nodded, accepting this without protest. "That's fair. I made my choice even if I didn't fully understand it at the time. However," I continued, "there's nothing that prevents me from establishing new trusts or making new arrangements for the future based on what I've observed over the past year." Jason looked up sharply. "What do you mean?" "I mean that legacy isn't static, Jason. It evolves. Each generation of Reynolds men has shaped it according to their time and circumstances. The values remain constant, but how we implement them changes." I placed a folder on the desk between us. "Murray has drawn up new documents, not to restore what was lost, but to create something new, something you'll have to earn through demonstrated commitment to the principles that matter." "I don't understand. You've shown me over the past year that you genuinely want to be part of the Reynolds tradition, not for financial gain, but because you value what it represents. These papers establish a path forward, a structured way for you to gradually assume responsibility within the family business, and eventually, if you choose, to reclaim the Reynolds name legally." Jason looked stunned. "You'd let me be a Reynolds again? After what I did?" "Names can be given or taken away, on paper, Jason. Being a true Reynolds is about actions and values. You've been acting like a Reynolds for the past year, regardless of what your legal documents say." I pushed the folder toward him. "This isn't an automatic restoration of what you signed away. It's an opportunity to build something new, something that's truly yours. Because you've earned it." He opened the folder, hesitantly scanning the contents. "These are incorporation papers for a new division of Reynolds Construction, Reynolds Sustainable Development. Yes, an expansion focusing on environmentally responsible building practices and affordable housing initiatives. Something you've shown interest in during our conversations. The structure allows for you to earn equity through work and demonstrated leadership over a 5-year period. And this other document, about name change procedures, that's for when you're ready, if you choose to reclaim the Reynolds name legally. It's entirely your decision. The business opportunity exists regardless of what you call yourself." Jason was silent for a long moment, processing everything. Finally, he looked up, his expression a mix of gratitude and determination. "I want to earn it back, all of it. Not just the name, but everything it stands for." "I know you do," I replied. "That's why we're having this conversation." We spent the next hour discussing the details of the new arrangement, the expectations and opportunities it presented. Unlike the documents he had signed a year earlier, Jason read these carefully, asking thoughtful questions that demonstrated his growing business acumen and genuine engagement with the family legacy. As our meeting concluded, he asked one final question. "What about Mum?" Where does she fit in all this? That's largely up to her and to you. She's made significant changes this past year, confronted some hard truths about herself and her choices. The Reynolds tradition has always been about building community, not just structures. Family is the most important community we have. The next day, I invited Sarah to join us for the final session, working on Jason's desk. Her initial hesitation gave way to genuine interest as Jason proudly showed her the techniques he had learned and the progress we had made. When the desk was finally completed, all three of us stood back to admire the result of our collective effort. "It's beautiful," Sarah said, running her hand along the smooth surface. "I can't believe you built this, Jason." "Dad taught me," he replied, simply the words carrying weight beyond their surface meaning. In that moment, watching my son and his mother appreciate something built with care and intention, I felt a sense of completion. The painful lesson I had delivered a year ago had served its purpose not as punishment, but as catalyst for growth. The Reynolds legacy would continue, not just in buildings or bank accounts, but in values lived and passed forward. The desk now sits in Jason's room, in the Riverside Heights house, a tangible symbol of what can be built when we understand what truly matters. And the pocket watch, though returned to me for safekeeping until his 18th birthday, represents the continuity of a tradition that transcends legal documents and temporary setbacks. Some things in life truly are beyond price, beyond legal transfer, beyond even our own mistakes and misunderstandings. The lessons of character craftsmanship and contribution that define the Reynolds name have proven more resilient than any challenge we've faced. In helping Jason discover this truth, I've rediscovered it myself. What about you? Is there something in your life that holds value beyond any price tag? A family tradition or name that carries special meaning? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. If this journey of losing and reclaiming what matters most resonated with you, please like and subscribe to share in more reflections on family legacy and the true meaning of wealth. And remember, sometimes the most valuable inheritance isn't what's in a bank account, but what's been built into your character through generations of love and wisdom. Thank you for joining me in this deeply personal story.